What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are having a great day out there. Time to talk about Intel, which reported earnings after the bell today. We'll talk about a little bit of the news going back just a little bit. They have a new CEO incoming. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the guidance that they gave and how it impacted the quarter, how they kind of beat on the top and the bottom line. We'll jump into the numbers. The other thing that didn't make it, at least in the initial press releases, is they actually raised their dividend. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll jump into the numbers more broadly. We'll take a look quarter over quarter and year over year. We'll see how things are going there. And then finally, we'll jump over the stock chart. Like I said, this thing is actually up. Well, I'm seeing about 7% on this data. Thing popped up, hit a resistance level. So we'll talk about if there's a spot in here where you can buy this one, if there's a trade set up possibly for Intel. So moving on here, we got a 240 billion market cap. Okay, this one's got a pretty tiny PE, about 12 PE. Might even be a little bit lower than that because they expected revenue to be 17.5 billion, EPS of 104. We actually saw earnings come in, or revenue come in at 20 billion, and earnings per share coming in at $1.42. So they really came in well above their guidance. So they kind of either sandbagged it or they had a pretty good quarter. Now, big news coming last week or so is Bob Swan, who is the CEO right now. He wasn't really seen as favorably. Okay, the people thought like NVDA and AMD had kind of passed these guys by, and they blamed Bob Swan. He wasn't really necessarily like this big tech guy. So they're bringing in the ex-VMware CEO, Pat Gelsinger. So he's coming in, and that definitely surged the stock. The stock went up about 11% over that week's time when he was announced. So very, very favorable move in terms of the stock chart. Now, so EPS beating by 41. They beat on that revenue. Man, everything looking pretty good. Now, the other thing that's looking really good, I think this is driving some of the gains as well. I think, investors are kind of comfortable. Intel might have beat the number, but they did raise the cash dividend by 5% to $1.39. So it was $1.32 per share. Now you're getting $1.39. So that's actually a decent increase, and that definitely will help the stock go up and will help support it. Now, looking at the numbers, so we've got our 3 months ended here, 19 over 20, and then we've got a full year view here. We see actually for the full year, we went from about 72 up to about, we'll call that 78 billion. So they had a really nice year in terms of growth here. Maybe people would be expecting more than that, but that looks to be about 8 to 9% growth on that top line. We see here in the quarter, it was down a little bit, but again, they guided for much less than that. Now, the gross margin looking solid, basically flat. We were at 11.9. We're about, call that 11.4 for the full year, essentially flat as well, up just slightly. Now, how they've done controlling costs, we actually see in the quarter, costs actually went up. We went from 5.01 to about 5.5. Again, in a quarter where we dropped just marginally about 300 million off our revenue, we did see costs go up about that same amount. Now, for the 12 months, we actually saw costs go down, but that's basically flat. Now, from an operating perspective, we went from 6.8 billion in revenue, operating income, down to 5.9. That's in the most recent quarter. But for the full year, we went from 22 billion up just fractionally to 23.7 billion dollars. That is really solid. That is why they were able to raise their dividend, because a marginally bad quarter, I wouldn't say bad quarter, but maybe a soft quarter in terms of operating income, because we saw operating income slip to this 5.8 number. We see that they still earned $1.42, okay? And they're paying basically $1.39 now in dividends. So they're making all that and more in a single quarter, let alone a decent quarter where they might earn $1.50, maybe even higher than that. For the full year, they earned $4.94, just really solid. Looks like they reduced the number of shares outstanding as well. So they're executing a buyback. Whether or not there's still meat on that bone left, it will be interesting to see. Now, the stock has really been on fire since they announced the new CEO incoming. This stock has been rocketing up. We're actually on a weekly view here. I wanted to pull in these all-time highs because these will create some resistance points. We actually saw the stock get up to where these highs were and where it was support here, and it got rejected right about, we'll call that $64 per share, and it's come down at about 62. I would say if you're just can't wait to get into Intel, anywhere in this box is not bad because we're on positive momentum here. The quarter looked good. The dividend should help support the stock a little bit. And, it's not that bad. Now, a more patient investor would wait for lower levels. Probably the first level I'm looking at is we'll call that about 58.50. That's a decent level in my opinion. And then further down below that is 56. Now, if this stock happens to just completely reverse trend, they get on the conference call and it doesn't sound good, well, it could come all the way down to the low 50s. High 40s in terms of share price. So that's where I'd be looking at Intel going over the next couple weeks, maybe even months ahead. But positive news from the dividend front, positive news from the management front. They definitely probably sandbagged a little bit on guidance as well. So I wouldn't necessarily pay attention to the guidance that they give forth in the next quarter. They'll probably beat that as well. But overall, pretty good stock, pretty cheap valuation, and if they can turn things around, you've seen how hot AMD and NVDA and some other chip names have been. Intel could follow right along with it if it can get its act together. So that was Intel. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. We'll be back again soon. Good luck with your investments.